Gen Z is a generation that has been raised on maximum exposure when it comes to horror. Most of us grew up on unmonitored internet access, leading to us stumbling on things like YouTube scary stories, creepypastas, or analog horror depending on the specific age group. And by the time we were old enough to get into the cinema and see these horror movies, a lot of us were already pretty educated on the genre. We are naturally very difficult to surprise. We've seen some of the bloodiest kills already, we've endured some of the most elevated dread, and the most twisted slow burns you've never seen. Looking at the landscape of horror right now, you have to ask a question in why a black and white movie from 1960 still manages to dominate the conversation of some of the best horror movies ever made. How is it that a film where the biggest twist has been parodied in everything from The Simpsons to SpongeBob still holds the crown as the absolute pinnacle of the horror genre for so many people? Like, I'd heard about the shower sequence before I learned the name for the tip of a shoelace. I knew the twist with Norman Bates before I was even all that familiar with the idea of a spoiler. Simply by consuming content online, I had absorbed the story of this movie just by existing in the world. I was completely spoiled by a term that we're going to be labeling in this video as cultural osmosis. Despite knowing what I was getting into, it still completely threw me, and today I want to talk about the reasons why Psycho has simply refused to fade. I want to talk about why, even for people considered Generation Z like myself, Psycho remains untouched as the perfect horror movie. But first, I want a little word with you, because last video I mentioned that around 98% of you were not subscribed. Little bit of an ego hit, but we'll move on. And it turns out that my grovelling has worked, because now only 93.6 of you are not subscribed. That is crazy. That's a massive improvement. Dare I say, that's a little bit psycho of you. But people, if you enjoy this content and you want to see more of it, then like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. But of course only if you enjoy the video, and if we can somehow get it down to 90% within 30 days of this video coming out, I don't know, I'll bring back Last Month I Watched or something. Anyway, I'll let you get back to the video because you're bound to need to do literally anything else today. I personally think if Psycho were to be released by a modern indie studio today, audiences would riot. At the very least, Letterboxd would be flooded with 1-star reviews complaining about the pacing and the false advertising, because for its first 45 minutes, Psycho is barely a horror film. It's an intense, anxious thriller about a woman who decides to steal $40,000 from her boss to run away and start a new life with her boyfriend. In the 60s, a woman stealing that sum of cash and fleeing her life would be scandalous. But to see this on film in today's economy, stealing that much money from an arrogant real estate agent who literally waves his wealth in your face doesn't make Marion a villain. That woman is a hero to the nation. We inherently understand the fantastical nature of wanting to run away and start a new life, and the fantasy of buying your way out of any misery that befalls you. Alfred Hitchcock took that intense relatability and built a suffocating atmosphere from her guilt. During the extended sequence of Marion driving into the unknown future, we hear all of those imagined voices in her head. Her boss discovering the missing money, the creepy highway police officer that questioned her when she was sleeping at the roadside in her car. It's a direct visualization of her panicked overthinking. It's a panic attack behind the steering wheel, handled with an eerie composure as we are stuck there with her, wondering if she's going to get away with it, and if not, what's going to stop her. This is a term known as a MacGuffin, a term widely credited to an English screenwriter named Angus MacPhail, and this refers to something as the bait of the plot. We get so fixated on the idea of the stolen money and the cops and the getaway plan that we slowly forget all about the genre that we're watching. Modern horror is something that will telegraph a scare or dread from its opening frame. An atmosphere is present in the establishing shots that tell you exactly what this is about to be. Whether it be unusual lighting or an uncanny soundtrack, the point is you normally know what you're in for. But instead of doing that here, Hitchcock serves up a totally different but fully engaging movie just so he can violently rip it away from you. Because in truth, the money and the getaway do not matter in the slightest. The universe turns out to be cruel, and that random rug pull hits harder than any jump scare in this movie possibly could. And no amount of cultural osmosis could prepare you for that. Now, before we actually let Marion here step into the shower, we're gonna have to talk about Norman. Forget Michael Myers, forget Jason Voorhees, forget Ghostface. I could never. When we watch horror now, and more typically slashers, the killer is usually this unkillable supernatural force or some silent brute in a mask. But Norman Bates is not that. Anthony Perkins plays him with this nervous, deeply awkward charm. He stutters, he's a victim of his overbearing, mostly unseen mother. He's polite, offering Marion food due to all other options being closed and the weather on top of that. We constantly talk nowadays about weaponized incompetence, toxic behaviour and red flags, and some of this is even stuff weirdly enough that will be covered in my next video on obsession, which makes this a weirdly timed one. Norman exemplifies all of these points because he hides his misogyny through his aesthetic of a harmless loner. Marion likely only drops her guard because he comes across as a little pathetic. She pities him, she believes that she can fix him, or at the very least give him some gentle life advice before she heads to sleep for the night. There's this scene where Marion finds herself stuck with Norman, surrounded by these taxidermied birds. Norman leans in and delivers that now infamous line of,
"We all go a little mad sometimes."
And it's agonising. It's this romanticised, almost edgy approach to mental illness that sounds like it was written by some angsty teen online. What really makes Norman such an unsettling character is that rather than portraying the monster under the bed, Perkins plays him as the ordinary guy at the front desk of a hotel. Someone that seems so safe, you may be forgiven for turning your back on him. Hitchcock uses that harmless persona to drag us down into that dirt with him. We live in an era that is rife with constant surveillance. We scroll our phones to watch people's lives, judge their mistakes, and consume trauma as news for our entertainment. We are all voyeurs in that sense, and Hitchcock forces that exact role onto us as the audience. Right before the big kill, Norman removes a painting from the wall to reveal a peephole in Marion's cabin. The camera shifts and suddenly we're placed within Norman's point of view. We're the ones looking through that hole, watching as Marion undresses. Hitchcock shoves us into the physical position of the creep. The movie is calling us out here. We have sat down to watch something terrible happen to someone and we have to live with seeing it happen now. By forcing us to look through the peephole ourselves, we are left feeling the guilt that Norman is incapable of experiencing. We stop being passive viewers in this thing and become accomplices to murder in some weird sense. A massive chunk of internet horror nowadays is obsessed with the idea of liminal spaces. You know, look at the backrooms as a perfect example of that. These are places meant for transition that feel inherently hostile and deeply unsettling when you find yourself in one alone. This is exactly how the Bates Motel feels to me at times. It's how I feel it comes across in the film. It's an old roadside motel bypassed by the construction of a new interstate highway. Geographically, it's isolated, stuck in a period of time that has since passed. It's as if when Marion arrives, she leaves her car in the rain and steps out of reality. The production design is doing an insane amount of heavy lifting here. The motel itself feels as though it kind of fits. It represents reality and the waking world, but looming right behind it is the Bates house. A rotting gothic nightmare that stretches vertically into the sky, casting this long, dark shadow over the motel. This represents a physical manifestation of Norman's fractured brain. The conscious mind is running the front desk, while the repressed trauma is locked up within the house on the hill. Before we had such internet fame stories like Kane Parson in the Backrooms, we had Hitchcock building the ultimate liminal space on a studio backlot. And this environment also becomes a playground for something else that would later become something of a modern internet trope. In the latter half of the film, Marion's sister and her boyfriend go looking for her. They book a room at the motel under fake names, they sneak around actively distracting Norman so that Lila can break into the house and look for clues. When you watch this today, it's pretty easy to actually assign Lila and Sam to the idea of the original internet sleuths. When authority fails, they take it upon themselves to investigate a tragedy, treating a real person's disappearance as nothing more than a puzzle. We see this all the time in internet spaces, with people overstepping boundaries, convinced that they're going to be the one that cracks the case. And topically, we see this exact idea with Lila, sneaking upstairs, trespassing into the mind of a killer. You know, unfortunately for her, she does actually succeed, finding what she's looking for. It's just far more horrifying than she ever could have imagined. Okay, I think we should now probably wind back and actually touch on the shower sequence, because growing up with the gore and the effects that I've seen in movies makes it pretty easy to expect a 1960 film to feel incredibly tame in comparison. There isn't any CGI, I mean the blood swirling down the drain is literally watered down chocolate syrup, but that isn't necessarily the point of this thing. You'd be wrong to view the shower sequence in that regard because its real magic lies in the editing. Hitchcock spent a full week shooting this scene. There are around 78 camera setups and over 50 cuts. It's erratic and it's violent and it's jarring, and the camera is framed as a weapon, so every quick cut feels like a physical stab. When you combine that with the incredibly iconic score, it's a pure sensory overload. Wildest part is you never actually see that knife break skin, which is weird because I feel like I swear I can remember seeing it somewhere. In truth, it probably is just the fact that your brain does most of the work here. You imagine this level of gore that comes with the territory and the context of the scene. More than anything else, it breaks the conventional rules of storytelling. Killing the A-list star is something that we have spoken about on this channel with my Scream video, but this, to my knowledge, is where the idea comes from. In doing this, Hitchcock eradicates any chance of plot armor. In most things, you can probably figure out the final girl in the first 10 minutes, but if the main character can get slaughtered in some dingy bathroom at the 45-minute mark, nobody is safe. We have that whole scene, and it is a masterpiece in a cinematic context, but what follows it is equally important to the narrative, because Norman runs down the stairs and finds this body, and rather than alert someone, he just begins to clean it up. For an agonising amount of minutes, there is almost zero dialogue. We just sit there watching Norman methodically scrub this bathroom clean. He gathers her things, throwing them in the trunk and pushing the car into the swamp out back. This then presents a pretty impressive psychological trick on the audience, because we've just watched our main character die, so there's a void there. We need someone to latch onto and root for, and so despite his creepy actions last time we saw him, we have this shift in our empathy and we begin rooting for Norman. When the car hesitates for a moment as it sinks, you actually find yourself becoming a little concerned alongside him. The movie manipulates you into rooting for a guy covering up a murder that we believe was committed by his mother. We are accomplices to this cover-up. It's a perfect way of highlighting just how easily our empathy can be hacked when the writing is that good. Finally, we'll look at the ending. After the incredible reveal in the cellar, the movie cuts to a police station. There, a psychiatrist sits and spends several minutes explaining just what's wrong with Norman. He breaks down the split in his personality, the matricide, the jealousy that makes Norman who he is. And there is probably room to complain about this scene. I have no doubts that people have probably tried. I could see a situation where people label this as nothing more than a cheap exposition dump that explains anything that the rest of the film couldn't care to touch on. But watching it now makes complete and utter sense. We're living in this golden age of true crime. People are obsessed with the idea of profiling serial killers and summarising human evil within tight podcast episodes. We want to believe that if we can just map out a killer's psychology and attach all these medical labels to it, we can control the danger. In this epilogue of sorts, the psychiatrist is feeding the audience what we want, a rational excuse for an irrational event. But Hitchcock then goes ahead and undercuts that too. After the doctor finishes his speech, we cut to Norman in the holding cell, but the labels haven't contained anything. He's not cured, and he looks straight into the camera, staring right through us with this terrifying, knowing smile. And to make matters worse, to physically represent the turn, for a split second, the grinning skull of his mother even flashes over his face. The logical explanation that we receive means nothing. The analysis is just a way to make us feel safe. The monster is still there, staring right back at us. Psycho survives as the perfect horror movie because it refuses to settle for one avenue of fear. This movie is an exercise in weaponized manipulation. Hitchcock takes everything that we trust, our empathy for a struggling woman, or the awkward charm of a quiet guy, or the privacy of a locked door, or the basic rules of storytelling, and uses them all against us. Look at modern horror. Whenever a movie tricks you into trusting the wrong person, uses music to induce anxiety, traps you, or punishes you for looking too closely, I think a lot of it stems from these seeds that were planted by Psycho. We might be a generation where 90% of us have to have Family Guy clips playing underneath a movie scene to understand what's happening. We might even know a lot of the twists before we even hit play, but knowing the punchline doesn't really matter when the delivery is this ruthless, casting a shadow over everything that comes after.